Lindsay smiled as she walked out the front door of her home, taking a minute to smell the fresh air and wince at the noise coming from the back end of the house. She would have said something, except that she knew that new addition was for her. Recently, Lindsay's parents had decided that the growing girl needed a new room, complete with a full bathroom, walk-in closet, and generally more living space. Her old room, she had been informed, would be turned into a study for her dad, a professor at the local university. On one hand, Lindsay was ecstatic to be having a new room, but on the other, she was kind of sad to see her old room go. She absolutely adored the Care Bear wallpaper with the Muppet Babies border, the pink carpet, and the frilly window drapes. However, at 18 years of age, her parents had decided that her old room was too babyish. Unbeknownst to them, that was precisely the reason that Lindsay loved it. Lindsay loved her old room, her stuffed animals, her pacifier, her bottle, and most of all, her diapers. When she had some, anyway. Lindsay was a teen baby, though no one but her even had a clue about it. She had been into playing baby for about a year now, ever since that one episode of Jerry Springer's show. She had thought the idea to be laughable at first, but then, as her curiosity grew, she discovered that there was a large community of these adult babies occupying the far reaches of the internet. As she delved deeper into this lifestyle, her own feelings were stirred in ways she could not describe at first. Then, one day, she decided to try it out for herself. Ever since that first diaper, Lindsay had been hooked on the idea, buying several baby items, some onesies and sleepers, and other assorted big baby things with her allowance. She usually kept these things hidden under the floor in a secret compartment in her room, but with the construction going on, she had buried them in a plastic tote out in the woods. But she couldn't live without diapers, which she was currently out of. Lindsay turned towards her garage, backpack over her shoulder, and $20 in her pocket. The local drugstore carried the kind of diapers she liked, and today she was intent on picking some up. The only people at the house were the construction crew, and they wouldn't know what was going on inside the house. Her bike was where she had left it, though she had been asked several times to move it so that her parents could get their cars in and out of the garage easier. Rolling her eyes at the thought of her parents whining about something so minor when their own daughter was spending much of her time alone in diapers and baby clothes behind their back, she pedaled out of the driveway and was on her way. Lindsay was about halfway to her destination when something ran across the road in front of her, almost making her fall off her bike. She swerved to avoid whatever it was, almost lost control of the bike, and heard a loud sound, almost like a car honking. Then she was asleep. Oh God! Lindsay thought, I'm blind. I got hit by a car and I'm blind. This was the first thing that crossed her mind as she snapped awake. She took a deep breath and calmed down. She noticed that instead of being blind, her eyes were in fact covered with bandages, probably due to some head trauma. Judging by the ache in her noggin, she was right about her head. She felt around herself and realized she was lying in a not-so-uncomfortable bed with thin flimsy sheets. There was a rail on either side, but just enough to cover her body, as further exploration revealed that the rail did not extend past her upper thighs on either side. She reasoned that she was probably in a hospital bed. Her clothing, she discovered through feeling, consisted of nothing but a loose hospital gown and a diaper. Lindsay's heart almost jumped out of her chest as she felt the smooth plastic-covered padding surrounding her waist and crotch. How long was she out? Why was she wearing a diaper? Why was it wet? Lindsay was dying of curiosity almost to the point that she was about to take her head bandages off to get a look around, when suddenly she heard someone entering the room. She went still, not knowing who was in the room with her, and she did not want to embarrass herself. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Kluke, Lindsay appears to be fine, a male voice was speaking, apparently to Lindsay's parents, but she still hasn't woken up yet. It's been 2 days, and I expect her to awaken any time now. Well, it was her mom, I hope she wakes up soon. The injuries weren't too severe we were told, but what about long-term brain damage? Yeah, Lindsay's father spoke up, we need to know if our little angel is going to be the same girl as before. Lindsay's parents sounded concerned, and Lindsay suddenly felt a hand on her arm, probably her mother's. She still pretended to be asleep, trying to ascertain the extent of her damage. She didn't have any broken bones that she could tell, and her brain seemed to be working okay. The fact that she was asleep for 2 days explained her diapered condition, and also the fact that her diaper was currently in need of changing. The doctor spoke again. We don't anticipate any lasting mental damages, though she may need counseling afterwards to come to grips with what happened. Certainly, her mom seemed to perk up, whatever it takes to make our little girl okay again. I just wished she would wake up soon. She'll be fine, Han. Lindsay's dad seemed concerned, but calm. Let's go get something to eat. Oh, and doctor, please send someone in to change her. She's wet again. Sure thing, Mr. Kluke, we'll inform you if anything changes. Lindsay heard everyone leave the room, then started thinking. This could be my chance. I've read stories where people regress to babies after being hit in the head on the internet. If I can fool everyone into thinking that I had the mind of baby, I'll get treated just like a baby. This will be great. Lindsay's mind rushed on, figuring out all the little details of how to make herself seem as though she had regressed to a more babyish mindset. The first thing she realized was that she would have to start using her diapers like a baby. Not too hard, as that was what she had planning to do when she got back from the pharmacy that fateful day anyway. She knew what she had to do. She relaxed and peed some more into her diaper. A minute or two later, a young nurse entered the girl's room, fresh diaper in hand, as well as a washcloth and talcum powder. As she approached the girl's bed, she noticed something odd. Lindsay was sucking on her thumb. And sitting upright in the bed. And she was crying. The nurse noticed the tears rolling down the young girl's face, the way she turned as the nurse entered the room, and the way she was slightly rocking back and forth. She was awake. The nurse bolted from the room to inform the doctor. A few minutes later, Lindsay heard the door open again, this time accompanied by voices. The doctor, her mother, and her father, along with a new voice, probably the nurse from earlier, were all talking at once. The doctor told everyone to be quiet as he approached the bed. Lindsay's diaper was soaked, almost to the point of leaking, she was sucking her thumb, and she was slightly crying. Not really crying, but forcing out tears nonetheless. "Lindsay, I'm going to take off the bandages on your head now, okay?" asked the doctor. Lindsay had this planned out. Her only response was to moan slightly and suck harder on her thumb. She could feel the bandages being removed slowly, and soon she could open her eyes. At first nothing met her gaze but a large bright blur. Slowly her eyes came into focus and she saw that she was in a normal hospital room. From the evidence around the room, it seems her parents had been staying at the hospital the entire time. Her eyes locked on her mother, she took her thumb out of her mouth, held out her arms and spoke. "Mama," followed by some babyish blubbering. Her mother rushed to her open arms, crying. Her father just stood back, trying to look tough, but eventually succumbed and also rushed to his daughter. "Are you okay, honey? Are you hurting anywhere? We were so worried." Her mother was going a mile a minute, not slowing down for answers. That was fine with Lindsay, she didn't intend to give any concrete answers. She was going to be a baby. Finally, Lindsay's mother let her go, and just looked at her, a slight look of concern on her face. Lindsay had gone back to sucking her thumb and crying while rocking slightly. "What's wrong, honey?" her mom asked, looking scared. Lindsay looked down at her wet diaper, and pulled at the cover with her free hand and burst into a full-force bawl. She wanted to be changed, couldn't they see that? Geez, were these people dense. The nurse rushed forward, excess diaper in hand. "Let me take care of this, she's just cranky 'cause she's wet." The nurse was unconcerned with the behavior of the girl, thinking it best to leave that to the experts. She, however, was a diaper-changing expert. She swiftly but gently pushed the bawling 18-year-old onto her back, unfastened her diaper, wiped her down thoroughly with the warm cloth, powdered, and re-diapered her, all in under a minute. Lindsay slowly stopped bawling, still keeping her thumb in her mouth, and smiled blankly up at the ceiling, drool tracing its way down her cheek. "Doc," her dad almost grabbed the pudgy man, "what's wrong with her? Calm down, please." The doc quickly regained his composure after witnessing the scene played out in front of him. "I've seen this kind of thing before. When some people suffered severe traumas such as this, sometimes they create an alternate personality to repress their feelings. It seems your daughter has done the same thing, but her alternate personality is that of a baby's." The doc shook his head in amazement. "So you're saying she's acting like a baby because she's hurt?" Her mom was terrified. No, Mrs. Kluke, it's just a coping mechanism." "So what do we do?" asked her dad. Lindsay was eating this up. They had fallen for her ploy completely. She almost couldn't contain her laughter, redirecting it towards contented cooing and gurgling instead. She was just too good of an actress. The doctor heard the sounds and looked at the girl. "There's a couple of things we can do. It's not safe to try and force her out of it by acting like there's nothing wrong, so we can either treat her like she's acting and let this run its course. With the help of a good counselor she could be back to normal within days. Or," the doctor trailed off. "Or what?" her dad asked, not liking the idea of a 14-year-old baby to deal with. "There is a new experimental treatment for these kinds of things." The doc looked intently at Lindsay, who just smiled and drooled back, enjoying the feeling of acting like an infant in front of all these people. "Some of my colleagues were working with a sort of sleep hypnosis, in which the subject's repressed personality is brought back to the forefront via subliminal suggestion. It's experimental, but much faster than conventional counseling." Lindsay's mom let go of her hand, which immediately entered her mouth along with the thumb from her other hand, and turned to the doctor. "Whatever it takes to get my daughter back to normal, we're willing to try it." "All right then," the doctor replied, we'll need to keep her in the psychiatric ward while the treatment is performed, as it will be more comfortable for her in her current state. If you'll follow me, we'll get started on the paperwork, and the nurse here will take little Lindsay over to her new room." Everyone left the room, except for the nurse, who just looked at Lindsay and smiled. Lindsay, for her part, started crying out for her mama, while bawling her eyes out and kicking her legs, trying to act every bit the infant. The nurse hugged her in an effort to comfort her, and said soft things in Lindsay's ear to help calm her down. Lindsay decided she'd made enough fuss for the time being and settled back down onto the bed, thumb back in her mouth and legs waving slightly in the air, trying to catch her toes with her free hand. The nurse wheeled Lindsay out into the hall, trying her best to cover the girl with the bed sheets, only to have them kicked off again and Lindsay's diaper exposed for the whole world to see. Lindsay didn't care about the strange stares she was receiving, she was happy to be treated just like the baby she had wanted so badly to be. The nurse pushed the bed into a large elevator, pushing one of the buttons and quietly singing a lullaby to the seeming mentally disturbed girl on the bed. The elevator arrived at its destination with a ding and the nurse pushed Lindsay into the hallway. Lindsay noticed right off that this wing of the hospital was made to treat children, as the walls were painted with pastel colors and images of baby blocks, trains, and teddy bears. The nurse wheeled the bed into a large room, and Lindsay's eyes almost fell out of her head. The room was a nursery, but not just any nursery. The crib in the corner was large, larger than any crib Lindsay had ever seen. The changing table was wider, longer and closer to the ground. There was padding along the walls up to about a foot over Lindsay's head, and there were toys. Lots of toys. Toys of all shapes and sizes, mostly baby toys but some young child toys for ages 4 and up. Lindsay could not believe what she was seeing. It seemed the hospital had was well prepared for every type of patient. "This is where you'll be staying for a few days, Han." The nurse sat the now drooling Lindsay up on the mobile bed and checked her diaper. "Let's get you a little more clothed and then you can play until it's time for dinner, okay?" Of course Lindsay didn't respond, and only put up a small amount of resistance as the nurse took off her hospital gown and dressed her in a t-shirt and coveralls. The clothes were a bit large on Lindsay, so the nurse rolled the pants legs up and pinned them up with a safety pin. She then wiped the drool off of Lindsay's face with a baby wipe and placed a large pacifier in her mouth. The pacifier had a strap on it, so it could be used as a gag also, Lindsay guessed, in case of a violent child or something. The nurse then turned on what appeared to be a baby monitor and patted Lindsay on the head. "Now you be good, and I'll be around to check on you in a little while. If you need anything, just call and someone will come." With that the nurse left, and as she closed the door, Lindsay heard a slight clicking sound, probably locking her in the room. She quickly looked around, and, not seeing any type of camera or two-way mirror, she smiled as large as she could and danced a little sitting on the floor jig. Upon closer examination of her surroundings, she found that the changing table was fully stocked to accommodate many different-sized babies. Along with diapers, there was an abundance of babyish clothing, various medical supplies, safely secured, baby powder, wipes, and many other things one would need to care for a child. The crib was indeed large enough to comfortably hold Lindsay, as she would find out later, and the toys in the chest were even made slightly larger than normal. The pacifier itself was large, but comfortable in her mouth, and Lindsay decided it could stay there for a while as she played contentedly with the toys in the room. After a while, Lindsay realized that her baby act was about to be put to the test, as she suddenly needed to go potty. She started to look around for a toilet, but then remembered that she was supposed to be acting like a baby to get this treatment. She braced herself for what she was about to do. Throughout the many times she had worn diapers in her house, she had only ever peed in them, always too afraid that the smell of poop would cause too much suspicion from her parents. Now she was going to experience just what it was like, firsthand. Lindsay moved into a kneeling position, then put her hands on the floor in front of her so that her legs were spread and the majority of her weight was on her hand and knees. Then she relaxed. It wasn't long before the next wave of cramps hit her abdomen. Her first reaction was to try and hold it in, but she fought that down and relaxed as much as she could until she felt the warm, slick mush pushing itself out into her waiting diaper. The diaper expanded as much as it could inside the loose-fitting overalls, but the poop still worked its way toward her back and front. The feeling wasn't all bad, but the smell and the way it stuck to her skin almost made her gag. When she was finally done out back, she released the floodgates of her bladder, soaking the now soiled diaper, and causing it to sag very noticeably inside her clothing. The feeling was strange, as Lindsay knelt there, with her pacifier in her mouth and a load in her diaper. She was content. She was happy. This was really what she wanted. She tried to move to a better position to continue playing with her toys, but instead slipped and found herself sitting flat on her butt, and her mess. This she did not like. The mess squished up against her and shifted all across her bottom. Suddenly she knew what she had to do. She had to do what any baby would do when faced with a messy diaper they didn't want to be in. She cried like an infant banshee. Within a minute, the nurse from earlier in the day ran into the room, half expecting the girl to be injured in some way, only to find her sitting on the floor, legs splayed out in front of her, pacifier laying uselessly behind and to the side. The nurse couldn't immediately discern the source of the girl's wails, until the smell hit her nose. "Oh my," the nurse exclaimed, approaching Lindsay and struggling to lift her to the changing table. "Seems our little girl had a bit of an accident, didn't she?" The nurse continued to talk baby talk to Lindsay while she situated the girl on the table, placing a strap across her chest to keep her from falling off. Lindsay hadn't much paid attention to the clothes she was wearing until the nurse started to unsnap the crotch of her outfit. Just like a baby, Lindsay thought. This fact, along with the pacifier being placed back in her mouth before the actual change began, calmed Lindsay's cries down to just a whimper, and by the time the nurse was done and a fresh diaper around her waist, Lindsay was once again cooing and gurgling in baby-full glee. "Well, that seems to have done the trick," the nurse quipped. "You stay right there, and I'll be back with some din-din, okay hon?" Lindsay smiled and cooed at her hand as the nurse left the room, leaving the girl strapped to the changing table. Moments later, the woman returned, pushing a large high chair in front of her. Lindsay was released from the table and taken to the chair, where she was once again strapped in, before the nurse slid the tray into place. She then left the room again, only to return with a plate of food. It was hard to tell exactly what the food was, but as before Lindsay could begin eating, the nurse smacked her hands away from the plate. "Now little girl," the nurse chastised, "not before I get your bib on you." With that, the nurse did indeed place a white rubber-backed bib around the young girl's neck. Once this was in place, the nurse proceeded to feed Lindsay as though she were every bit the baby she was playing at being. "Now eat up, hon," the nurse said, not expecting a reaction. "After you eat, it's time for bedtime time and your first treatment. Hopefully the doctors can bring you back to your old self in no time." The nurse was optimistic as she continued to feed Lindsay and talk to no one in particular. After her meal, Lindsay was once again placed on the changing table, unrestrained this time, and sitting upright. The nurse then unbuckled the front of Lindsay's overalls and removed them, followed by the shirt the girl had been wearing. She was then quickly given a sponge bath which Lindsay giggled through much of, then dried off and redressed, only this time in a footed sleeper, also with snaps in the crotch and down the legs. The sleeper zipped up in the back to prevent Lindsay from undoing it and getting at her diapers. Not that she had any desire to do so. Lindsay was then helped over to the crib, the side lowered, and the girl placed inside. Lindsay suddenly decided she wanted her pacifier back, as it had been removed during her supper, so she started to whine slightly. The nurse asked the girl what she wanted, but got no reply except more whining. The nurse then noticed the pasty on the changing table and picked it up. "I bet you want this, don't you?" The nurse approached the crib again, but first. The nurse suddenly produced a baby bottle from one of her smock pockets and shoved the nipple into Lindsay's open mouth. Lindsay, expecting her pasty, began to suck only to find cool apple juice flowing into her mouth. She then took the bottle from the nurse and made herself comfortable in her crib, sucking greedily on the bottle. As she was enjoying herself, a man walked into the room with a small folding chair in his hand. He set his chair up next to the crib where Lindsay was laying and began to talk to the suckling girl. "Lindsay, I'm a doctor with the hospital and I'm here to help you. I'm just going to talk to you, and help you sleep, okay?" Lindsay nodded her head. "Good. Now just relax and listen to my voice." The hypnotist continued on for some time, with Lindsay becoming more relaxed as he spoke to her. At some point, she felt that her bottle was empty and before she could make a fuss, her pacifier was placed in her mouth. As she drifted off into a trance-induced sleep, Lindsay smiled and listened to the man who was still talking to her. "And when you wake up, more and more of your repressed self will be present, and you will become who you once were." And then nothing. Lindsay awoke some time later, still in the crib, sucking on her pacifier. Slowly she sat up in her bed. She felt a dull ache in her head, and wasn't sure if her diaper was wet again or not. For some reason, however, she didn't much care whether her diaper was wet or not, she just cared that she was hungry and her head hurt. Without much of a second thought, she started to cry. She wanted some attention and she wanted it now. She knew that is why babies cried, and she was trying to be a baby, so she cried. Soon a new nurse entered the room and approached the girl crying in the crib. "Good morning, princess," the woman cooed. "How are you this morning?" The only answer the woman got was more of the same crying from Lindsay. "Let's just check your diaper and then get you some breakfast, okay? My, you are a wet little girl, let's get you changed." The crib rail was lowered and Lindsay was once again taken to the changing table where the nurse proceeded to change her diaper through the snaps in the crotch of the sleeper. Lindsay stopped crying, as she was in a fresh clean diaper, but her head still hurt. The nurse must have noticed the way the girl was favoring her head. "Don't worry," the nurse reassured the girl, "you'll take some medicine with your breakfast that will make that nasty bumpy wumpy all better." Lindsay wanted to cringe at the way she was being addressed, but her resolve told her that babies were treated this way all the time. That, and something inside her told her it was okay, because she didn't need for words to make sense. Lindsay pushed that thought down and continued her charade. Breakfast was served the same way dinner had been the day before, in a high chair, bibbed, and cooed over. Lindsay thoroughly enjoyed this treatment, though she knew that it wasn't right. She figured it was because of her commitment to the act. But it wasn't all that. She really enjoyed this on a much deeper level than just that of a teen baby. It felt right, more right than it did the day before even. Lindsay just enjoyed herself and accepted the treatment. After breakfast, Lindsay was sponge-bathed again and left to play in a diaper and onsie with her toys. Yesterday she had played with the toys out of novelty, but today she really enjoyed playing. She just relaxed and let herself be amused by the objects in the room. When she felt the need to use the bathroom mid-morning, she relaxed and just let the pee flow, even as she continued to crawl around the room and play. She knew that soon someone would come and change her diaper, so she didn't worry about crying. She was right, and about 30 minutes later a nurse came to check up on her and took care of changing her diaper. She was then given another bottle of juice while she played. A little while later, her parents came to visit her, along with the man from the night before. They talked about her treatment, and her parents hugged and consoled the girl as she played, but she didn't pay much attention to them, she was so engrossed in just playing. The man talked to her parents extensively though Lindsay didn't know the meaning of most of the words he said, though she thought she probably should. After a couple of hours of playing patty cake and peekaboo, Lindsay felt the need to go poop again. She stopped playing with her mother for a minute as she went into the position she remembered from the day before, a far-off look in her eye. "What's wrong, honey?" her mom asked, slightly concerned. Her only answer was the sight of an expanding rear end and the smell of feces emanating from her daughter's behind. Lindsay also peed just for good measure. Then, without even thinking about it, Lindsay started crying and sat back down on her behind. She knew it would make a bigger mess, but she didn't care. She just wanted to be out of this messy diaper and be on with her playing. She bawled her eyes out and looked to her mother, arms outstretched. "Oh honey," her mom exclaimed, "why didn't you say you needed to go?" "Oh, well, let's get you changed." Lindsay's mom took her to the changing table. "I'll go get a nurse," Lindsay's father said. "No need," her mother replied, "I'm fully capable of changing my own daughter's messy diaper." She quickly set about changing her messy daughter, taking care to clean her good and to apply just the right amount of powder, then re-diapered her and closed the snaps of the onsie again. Both parents then hugged and cried a little over their daughter as it was time to go home, and time for Lindsay's nap. A nurse came into the room and helped her into the crib, raised the side, and placed her pacifier back in her mouth. Lindsay awoke sometime later to find a nurse checking her diaper. She wanted to tell the woman she was dry, but just laid back and let the woman find out for herself. When her dryness was firmly established, Lindsay was taken from her crib and placed on the changing table. Lindsay was confused, as she didn't need changing, so why bring her over here? Just then a doctor entered the room and began to examine Lindsay's head. He poked and prodded, asking questions but getting no answers other than the occasional whimper when he touched a tender spot. Then the doctor smiled, said something, and left. Lindsay wasn't paying much attention to the doctor, and didn't catch what he had said. She spent much of the rest of the day playing with her toys, drinking from her bottle, or having her wet diapers changed. Once again, supper time came and she was bibbed and placed in the high chair for her meal. This time, though, instead of being cooperative with the nurse trying to feed her, Lindsay decided to see what it was like to make a fuss. It was easy for her due mostly to the fact that they were trying to feed her carrots, which she hated with a passion. Lindsay turned her head this way and that each time the carrots were offered, smearing carrot juice and other things all over her face and bib. By the time the meal was over, Lindsay was a mess. The nurse cleaned her up, checked and changed her diaper, and dressed her in another footed sleeper. She was given a bottle of what tasted like milk and placed in her crib once again. Once again, the man with the chair came and talked to Lindsay until she fell asleep. Lindsay recognized it as the same speech he had given her the night before, but this time she fell asleep much quicker, only wakening when she felt her pacifier placed in her mouth. That night, she dreamed of cribs, playpens, high chairs, and nursery school. When Lindsay awoke next, she didn't know what time it was. She heard someone crying and quickly discovered it was herself. She was sitting up in her crib bawling her eyes out. Soon a nurse entered the room and attempted to calm the girl. Lindsay couldn't make out what the woman was saying, but she soon found herself laying on the changing table again, having her wet diaper changed. Next was breakfast again, and Lindsay ended up once again smearing herself with oatmeal as the nurse tried desperately to get the girl to eat. Lindsay didn't care, she wanted to get down and play. Soon breakfast was over, Lindsay was cleaned up and bathed, and she set about playing with her toys once again. Soon, a nurse found her sitting in the floor, one hand playing with a doll, the other in her mouth. The nurse replaced the thumb with a pacifier and started chastising the girl for sucking her thumb. Lindsay stared at the woman, but couldn't understand what she was saying. Not that Lindsay cared, she felt her diaper grow warm, smiled, and continued playing with her toys. Once again her parents and other people came to visit, and this time Lindsay happily played with her parents, even if she couldn't quite grasp why she didn't see them more often. The sounds they made at her were comforting though, and she giggled and cooed at them as they played. She had her diaper changed by her mother again, and soon enough it was time for her nap. All her playing that morning had really tired her out. She was put to bed and slept for about an hour before waking. Suddenly, Lindsay felt something was wrong. She sat up, pacifier in her mouth, dolly by her side and a mess in her diaper. That was it. She wanted changing now. She didn't like a messy diaper, but suddenly felt herself messing even more as she bawled. By the time the nurse got there, Lindsay was a very wet and messy teen-aged baby. The nurse rolled her eyes and set about the task of changing her young charge. 2 days later. The doctor looked at Mr. and Mrs. Kluke. I'm sorry the treatment didn't work, perhaps she was just unresponsive. Lindsay's mother adjusted the weight of her diapered daughter on her lap. It's not your fault, doctor. Maybe she'll just grow out of it. I hope so, Lindsay's father said. We've already converted her new room into a nursery for her, and I'd hate for it to have to stay that way. It cost so much and it was supposed to be a more grown-up room. I'm sure she'll be fine, the doc smiled, just give it some time. Lindsay looked at the people in the room. She didn't understand what they were talking about or why it was taking so long. She shifted around some as she felt herself messing her diaper. She wanted to be changed so she started to whine some and squirm around more. Somewhere, deep inside her, a personality that was never meant to be repressed screamed that this was out of hand, but Lindsay was too young of mind to know what that feeling was. She wet herself, sucked her thumb for a minute, and then cried. Her diaper was messy and she wanted to be changed. The end.